Bienvenidos! Today we're going to talk about relative superlatives in Spanish. Relative superlatives are simply a way to compare a noun to a larger group. Relative superlatives are, in the context of a larger group, when we're talking about the highest or greatest degree of something. For example, when we're talking about the best or the worst, when we're talking about the most or the least. And in Spanish, we use two different constructions to use these two different bases for comparison. In English, we use terms like the tastiest, the best, the worst. In Spanish, we don't add est on the end, but we do use a slightly different construction for the two different concepts. In English, if we wanted to say it's the best dinner in the restaurant, then we would have to be comparing dinner to all the other dinners in the restaurant. And in Spanish, if we wanted to make that same comparison, we would use almost exactly the same sentence structure to do that. We would say, es la mejor cena del restaurante. Es la mejor cena del restaurante. Okay? The only difference here really is the fact that we're saying in English and we're saying of the in Spanish. Okay? And then it's versus es. Okay? But the structure is basically the same. We use is or are, a definite article, we choose best or worst, say the noun, and then of and whatever the larger entity is. Now when we're talking about the most or the least in terms of an adjective, like she's the tallest girl in the class, or it's the tastiest dinner in the restaurant, then we have to use a different construction, and it looks a little different than what we do in English. So let's say it's the tastiest dinner in the restaurant. Okay? In Spanish, we would say es la, just like in English, but then we put the noun here, es la cena más sabrosa del restaurante. So these two components are the same, but when we want to say tastiest dinner, we have to say cena más sabrosa. We don't have that est we can add on to the end. In Spanish, we have to say cena más sabrosa. And then we have in the restaurant. Del restaurante. So if we want to say it's the tastiest dinner in the restaurant, in Spanish we have to say es la cena más sabrosa del restaurante. And these are the components in Spanish that you would follow in order to say that something is the tastiest, the tallest, the sweetest, the nicest. Anytime you're using the est, you would use this construction. Now, there are some irregulars. With this construction, with the est, we wouldn't say in English it's the goodest or the baddest. And the same in Spanish. You would not use bueno or malo or mal with this construction. You're going to use mejor or peor, best or worst. Okay? So with bueno and mal, you don't use this construction. And similarly, when you're talking about joven and viejo, and you're talking about people being older and younger, oldest and youngest, we don't really use this construction. We say, es el hombre we want to say he's the oldest man at church, we'd say, es el mayor hombre de la iglesia. Okay, he's the oldest man at church. Es el mayor hombre de la iglesia. If we want to use another example, we could look at multiple objects and say, son las mejores uvas de la tienda. They're the best grapes in the store. Okay, notice how mejor changes to plural because the noun we're describing is plural. Uvas. Son las mejores uvas de la tienda. Okay, they're the best grapes in the store. Or I could say they're the worst grapes in the store, and I would put peores here. Peores. Now, in Spanish, just like in English, we could also, if we're in a conversation and everybody knows we're talking about grapes, we could just drop off part of this sentence. And I've underlined the part that's optional. We could say, son las mejores. They're the best. Okay, just like we can say that in English. We could say, son las mejores uvas. They're the best grapes. And everybody knows we're talking about the best grapes in the store, or maybe the best grapes I've ever bought. But the best grapes in terms of the context of a larger entity. So the noun and the group that the noun is being compared to sometimes are optional and sometimes are left off in Spanish, just like we leave those off sometimes in English. And the same thing with this construction. Sometimes we can leave parts of this out and the sentence is still grammatically correct and meaningful, depending on the context of our conversation. We could say, it's the tastiest, okay? Just like in Spanish we can say that, except that we have to, because our construction's different, we have to leave the noun out. So I've underlined the noun because it can be optional sometimes. Es la cena más sabrosa del restaurante. We could say, es la más sabrosa, okay? We could leave out cena and just say, es la más sabrosa. We could also leave off el restaurante. We could say, es la más sabrosa del restaurante. We could say, es la cena más sabrosa, knowing that we're talking about the dinner that's the tastiest in the restaurant. Just like in English, we could say it's the tastiest dinner. We could say it's the tastiest in the restaurant. So I've underlined the pieces of this that can be left off depending on the context of the conversation and still maintain a grammatically correct and meaningful phrase.